Everyone, this is Chris Barron from the Partnership for Learning Ready Washington. Today we're going to talk about the basics of learning standards, and today we are joined by Kathy Taylor, as you see on the screen, Assistant Superintendent Teaching and Learning at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Thanks for joining us, Kathy.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, so today we'll talk about Washington's K-12 learning standards, why college and career readiness, where we are at the implementation of standards in our state. So we'll start off with a reminder, because sometimes, as you well know, when people talk about standards or Common Core, they really conflate everything. Standards, curriculum, assessment seem to be combined and conflated. Why don't you talk about the differences between standards, curriculum, and assessments?
Sure. Well, education, like any field, even journalism, has its own shorthand. So it's always good to start out by defining a few basic terms. So when we talk about standards, we mean our shared expectations for what students should know and be able to do. There's a vast universe of knowledge out there, and we have to have a way to identify and communicate what to focus on. So those are the standards. But standards are not curriculum, and they're not pedagogy. So we define what students should know and do, but we don't specify what materials to use or how to teach the standards. And then the third term, assessment, is the process of understanding what students know, and it entails a variety of tools, strategies, and approaches. Although assessment is most frequently associated with a four-letter word, test, it is much broader than that. But we'll leave that story for another webinar.
Yeah, nice and very clever. Washington's next slide is again, what reminder for folks. Washington's had learning standards for quite a long time, and they include many subjects. I think sometimes when they hear Common Core, they think Common Core is all that the state is the state learning standards, but that's not the case. Talk about the umbrella, Washington K-12's learning standards, and what's underneath that umbrella.
Sure. Learning standards are not new to Washington. Since 1993, Washington has defined learning standards, although for a long time we called them by another name, Essential Academic Learning Requirements, known more familiarly as ELRs. Now we call them learning standards, and over 20 years those standards have been regularly reviewed and updated. So an important thing to know is that standards are not stagnant. They're dynamic and they evolve over time. And you're right, although Common Core state standards in mathematics and English language arts and next generation science standards have been grabbing the limelight recently, the reality is Washington has standards in many more core content areas, some of which are listed on this slide.
Yeah, and are there any new sets of standards coming down that have been dictated by our state law, or anything that we need to know, or how regularly are standards updated in our state?
Well, there are new standards coming down. I was going to save that for later in the webinar, so let's let that be a teaser for now.
Okay. Hey, we
like and yes, there's a regular review process for all of the standards.
All right. Well, we just talked about Common Core and next generation science standards, so talk a little bit about what those standards do and why they're different.
Well, I think what's important about this slide is it's talking about how learning standards lay out a progression of learning that builds on what has been learned before, which sounds pretty simple, right? Except that if your standards try to include too much stuff, that's the technical term, a little bit about a lot of things, the risk is that students never get a chance to deepen their knowledge. It's like reading only the first chapter of a lot of really good books.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
So the Common Core state standards and next generation science standards both have been designed to build and deepen knowledge as students move through school, and I think that's a really important aspect of them.
And what have you heard from teachers generally in regarding the standards and the type of maybe different learning or different types of teaching they're doing because of this approach?
Our English language arts and our mathematics content experts have been hard at work working with teachers about the shifts in the Common Core, and as with any change, it takes a while to bring 50,000 teachers statewide onto this new way of thinking. But once teachers understand what this is about, once they understand the differences in what they're being asked to do, once they understand that it's really deepening and building on what students have learned, the reception has been very positive.
And part of the reason why we're moving, not only our state, but the nation, is for the focus on college and career readiness. Two things: we have equity and the economy. And as we can see on this slide, you know, equity in education is vitally important. And talk a little bit about that and what raising standards or raising expectations for all students can do.
I think college and career readiness standards and policies are fundamentally about equity. And we know that in 2016, a high school education alone is not enough. It's not sufficient preparation to secure and maintain a living wage job. So we need to help all students be prepared to extend their learning beyond high school in whatever form that might take. It might be technical training, it might be certificate programs, it could be degree-bearing studies. It can take a variety of forms. I think if I were to drill down here, I'd say college and career readiness standards set students up to have choices, and
Sure.
that means all students.
Yeah, and part of that choice is post-secondary education, but not only preparing students to get into college or post-secondary program, but to finish. You know, a large problem in our state and nationally is a high remediation rate. The best numbers we have for those in our state are two-year colleges. 54% for the class of in 2013, 54% of students had to take a remedial class in either math and/or English language arts, and that's a problem. That's time, money
Yes,
waste.
and it's been a long-standing problem. It's not a new problem. It's a long-standing problem, and it's unfortunate that our state data confirms how important it is to set the bar high enough that students can succeed. So we know through these college placement tests that are referenced on this slide that our graduates, many of our graduates, our recent high school graduates, are not ready for college level work in English or math. And that problem is not unique to Washington. So that's why conversations about standards took place across the country to pull together research and experts from K-12, higher education, workforce, to develop Common Core state standards focused on math and English language arts.
Sure. What is unique to Washington and a few other states, but Washington, with, you know, we have a high-tech aerospace economy, healthcare, and this slide just gives a quick overview of what we're looking at in our state. I mean, 50% of jobs by 50% of sorry, I'll start over. By 2017, there will be 50,000 unfilled jobs of highly skilled workers in Washington. And then we can see the next bullet is 80% of new jobs created in Washington by 2017 will be in STEM and healthcare. Those require post-secondary education. So, I mean, Washington's STEM, high-tech aerospace economy, you need the skills, whether you go to college or post-secondary training.
Yeah, you know, education isn't just about getting a good job, but certainly every parent wants their wants their child to move on earn a job, earn a living that keeps them out of their house and off their health insurance. So,
Yes.
so I think the importance of acquiring the education that will prepare you for a living wage job can't be understated. So, and it's unfortunate that Washington has jobs available that would meet that standard, but not always the skilled workers to fill them.
Sure.
And although STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, industry is probably one of the areas where we are most in need, it's not the only area. And it's really important that we enable our students, our citizens, to take advantage of job openings that could be available here.
Sure. And I know now we're to the teaser part of the section, as you mentioned earlier. We have implementation of learning standards. Just give an overview of what's happened in the state the last few years, and then what's the teaser part is what's happening.
Yeah. So where are we now with standards? This slide will gives a quick status report on the Common Core Math and English Language Arts and the Next Generation Science Standards. But as I teased you earlier, that we do periodically review all of our learning standards. So we just finished reviewing health and physical education standards. We are in the process of reviewing financial education and computer science standards. And then the arts are on deck for a review. So the beat goes on. I would say, go ahead. Did you have another follow-up question?
No, just go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that if I were kind of bringing this to a close, what's valuable about standards is they give us a common language and a shared focus, so that no matter where you are in the state or even across states, knowledge expectations for students are the same, and they're the same for all students. Someone told me recently that, yes, the standards are important, but partly that's because what's important is in the standards. And that doesn't mean that knowledge outside the standards is unimportant or that it can't be taught. It just means that knowledge outside the standards should supplement and not replace the state's learning standards. And to use a food analogy, which is one of my favorites, the standards are the cake and all else is icing.
Nice.
So
well, that was going to be my follow-up question, and now you've given us, to continue the food analogy, a lot to digest, Kathy. We appreciate.
Well, maybe the next. I was going to say maybe the next time we don't schedule this right before lunch.
That's right, and maybe we're both hungry. But we appreciate your time. As you can see on your screen now, there's where you can get more information on learning standards in our state. And again, we'll thank Kathy Taylor, Assistant Superintendent Teaching and Learning at OSPI, for her time. Thanks for joining us today, Kathy.
Thank you for having me.